the last week of July, that is from 24th to 31st. So let's see the topics which we are going to discuss in this video. The first is a PIL in the Supreme Court to remove the word socialist and secular from the preamble. Second being Rafale fighter jets arrival to India, national education policy, disqualification and 10th schedule, permanent commission to women into Indian Army, contempt of court, Consumer Protection Act, non-personal data, SOFI report, Maratha quota in Maharashtra, Hurricane Hanna, and Hong Kong's extradition treaty. So let's see the first topic. The first topic is a PIL or a public interest litigation was filed in the Supreme Court to remove the word socialist and secular from the preamble. So let us just know what are these words. So these words are the adjectives that are attached to the word republic in the preamble. So let me reiterate the fact that the preamble of India declares India as republic. So what is republic? Republic is a form of government in which the head of state is elected. Like in India, the head of state is president and president is elected by an electoral college. So what is important here is you need to remember the order of the adjectives. So the order of the adjectives can be asked as a supplementary question. Like they can give you a passage about this issue and they can ask a supplementary question below, like what is the order of the adjectives attached to the word republic. So this was asked many times also. So the order is sovereign, socialist, secular and democratic. So let's look into other things here. Okay, so the things which you should know is in the original constitution only two adjectives were attached to the word republic. They are sovereign and democratic. Only the words sovereign and democratic were attached in the original constitution. However, the words socialist and secular were added by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment 1976. So you know very well about this 42nd Constitutional Amendment 1976. So this is called as mini constitution and critics often criticize it as Indira's constitution. So this mini constitution has brought many changes. It has actually altered the basic fabric or the basic structure of the Indian constitution, which was affirmed in the Keshwananda Bharati case. To put in simple words, this 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act is just a retaliation to the judgment that was pronounced in the Keshwananda Bharati versus State of Kerala 24th April 1973. So now, why Indira Gandhi government added these words socialist and secular to the preamble? Hey, because of very personal reasons that Indira Gandhi is a hardcore socialist. So because of her hardcore socialism, a split occurred in the Congress party and the then Congress president Nijalingappa, he expelled Indira Gandhi from the party and the Congress got split into two. Indira Gandhi on one side and Nijalingappa on the other side. So this thing happened because she is a hardcore socialist. So what is socialism? Socialism is nothing but it is a form of economy or it is a form of government which everything should be owned by the state. So socialism prohibits private participation. Everything must be held in the hands of society or the state, to put in simple words. And we can see her hardcore socialist policies like banks nationalization and public sector undertakings nationalization, like she nationalized the coal sector and some poverty elevation schemes in the 5-year plans. And secularism prohibits state from having a religion or supporting any religion. So secularism is a Western concept and this was introduced with the motive that of minority appeasement. So this was a motive behind introducing the word secular at that point of time. But secularism, like in India, we practice what is called as positive secularism. That means equal treatment to all religions. Whereas the Western secularism says Western secularism completely separates state from the religion. That means there is a strict watertight compartment between state and religion. But in Indian secularism or positive secularism, equal treatment is given to all religions. That means either all religions are favored or they are treated equally. So this is the concept all about, the things which you should know before understanding this concept. So why did the petitioner move court on this matter? So just look at sample questions 9.3 and 9.5 in sample paper 2. These questions are on triple talaq bill, and 9.3 and 9.5 asks the petitioners and the respondents arguments in the court on a petition pertaining to this talaq e biddat or triple talaq. So it is very important for you to know why the petitioner has moved the court. So very simple thing is that it is antithetical to the constitutional tenets. That means it is contradictory to the Indian constitution and historical and cultural theme of India. Why? Because the petitioner's argument is very simple. He said that this act per se, that means in total, violates Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A of the Indian Constitution and the right to freedom of religion guaranteed under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. So it speaks about freedoms. So like if you know, freedom of profession is also included there. So socialism prohibits that, like there is a restriction by the state, and 25 allows citizens to practice their own religion. And secularism, the actual meaning of secularism is separation of state from religion. So the petitioner is saying that it is violative of the constitutional principles envisaged in Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A and also Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. So when this topic is in use, you must connect it with some other elite topics like a resolution in Rajya Sabha to remove the word socialist from preamble. Like earlier, a BJP Rajya Sabha member, he moved a resolution to remove the word socialist from the preamble, but it was it was not discussed because Rajya Sabha got adjourned. And next thing is a PIL in the Supreme Court to make official name of India as Bharat. So this was also in the news, and this happens to be very stupid thing. Like, you know what is PIL? PIL is public interest litigation, and by filing such type of petitions like to change the name of India as Bharat, this PIL has become publicity interest litigation or private interest litigation, because already Article 1 says that India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. So which effectively means that the official name of India is Bharat. And to add here, the word India was used appeared some 677 times in the Indian Constitution. And this petitioner is arguing to remove the word India and replace it with Bharat. So Parliament has to make 677 amendments to the Constitution. And it effectively is not in the domain of judiciary. So that is the thing. And you also need to know about the concept of PIL, because every day in the news the concept of PIL appears. Like, so as time has come, I'll try to explain what exactly is PIL. So PIL means public interest litigation. Public interest litigation is a litigation filed by a public spirited person who does not have specific interest in the case. What do I mean by specific interest? Specific interest in the sense, see, generally in a case, a litigation is filed by the aggrieved party. That means a person who is affected by the case. So this is called specific interest, and in legal terms this is called locus standi. LOCUS space STANDI. Locus standi means who are you in the case, what is your position in the case. And in PILs, the concept of locus standi is exempted. Okay, and another important thing is the word PIL you cannot find in the Indian Constitution. It is a judiciary evolved doctrine, or what I can say, it is an extra constitutional device exercised by the judiciary to protect the rights of individuals. So Justice P.N. Bhagwati and Justice Krishna Iyer, they are considered to be the progenitors of PILs in India. So this is a brief thing about PIL and Pushpa Kapila Hingorani. She is considered as the mother of PILs in India. She is a female advocate and she died some 3 years back, I suppose. Okay, and next important topic is Rafale fighter jets arrival to India. So this was covered largely by mainstream media and also in the social media. Like we got 5 out of 36 Rafale aircrafts. So they have arrived at Ambala Air Base in Haryana, and so after before this we acquired some Sukhoi fighter jets from Russia, and after 23 years we got this from Dassault Aviation. So this is manufactured by Dassault Aviation, and we got after 23 years. And what the government says that all the 36 jets will be delivered to India by the end of 2021. So yeah, so these are some of the specifications of Rafale deal, but they appear not to be so important for the exam, because I don't think they'll ask all these facts. But if you want to see, just take a screenshot and look at it. So now what we are going to do is we are going to compare our Rafale with China's J-20 Chengdu jets. So this is India's Rafale counterpart. And so what is this China's J-20 Chengdu? In simple words, I can say it appears to be powerful, but it is not as powerful as Rafale, or we can say that it is in some ways it might be on par with Rafale. So the thing is, this J-20 is considered as 5th generation fighter jet, whereas Rafale is considered as 4.5. But this J-20, it does not have any combat experience, whereas Rafale, it is used by French Air Force and by Afghanistan, by Libya, and also by Mali. And it has also been used for missions in Central African Republic, Iraq, and Syria. So another important thing is Rafale can also carry more fuel and weapons than J-20. Next, most important thing is this Rafale controversy. So this controversy prevailed till Supreme Court gave a clean chit to the government in the Rafale deal. So I tried to put it in very simple words. That is, see, first what happened is, during the UPA government, tenders were called for acquiring this Rafale aircrafts, and what this UPA government did, it made direct agreement with Dassault Aviation for what, to get 126 fighter jets at a price of some 54,000 crores, and out of that 18 would be in flyaway condition and remaining would be manufactured at HAL, that is Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, which is located in Bengaluru. So this would lead to transfer of technology, because only 18 jets will get in flyaway condition and remaining will be manufactured at HAL. Then it would provide employment as well as technology transfer to India. But what happened in 2016, when India came to power, this government of India made an agreement with government to government agreement. That means it made an agreement directly with France government and not with Dassault Aviation. But France, it is providing these Rafale jets from Dassault only, but we are making agreement with government of France. So what is the agreement? We'll get 36 fighter jets, and none of these would be assembled in HAL. That means all the 36 that we are getting will be in fly-away mode, and the total estimated cost is 59,000 crore. That means some around 60,000. See, now the controversy is, you have increased the price, like from 54,000 to around 60,000, and this became less in number. Like earlier there were 126 and they came down to 36. So why there is higher cost and why there is less in number? So this is the thing. And another major controversy is, here we have something called as offset clause. What is this offset clause? So this is around 60,000 deal, and out of this 60,000 deal, half of the thing, like half in the sense like around 30,000 has to be given by Dassault to Indian companies. Like the contract has to be given to Indian companies, and to which Indian companies this Dassault has given contract? It has given contract to DRDO and Reliance Defense. So now the point is, why Reliance Defense, which is headed by Anil Dhirubhai Ambani, came here? Because it is a new player. It even don't have the experience in manufacturing nuts and bolts. So the controversy here is, why did Anil Dhirubhai Ambani's Reliance Defense Company was given contract by Dassault Aviation? So this is the thing, and why HAL Hindustan Aeronautics is not included. So this is the controversy that is surrounding this Rafale deal, and subsequently it went to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court gave a clean chit to the government, and the details of the deal were presented to the court in sealed envelope. That means in a confidential document. And the constitutional bench which gave clean chit is the bench headed by Justice Ranjan Gogoi, because these bench questions, the judge who headed the bench in some major cases was asked in our sample papers also. And another controversy is about allegations on CAG auditing. So CAG is Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Every single penny that is drawn from the Consolidated Fund of India is audited by the Comptroller and Auditor General. So this Comptroller and Auditor General lays before the Parliament every year a statement of his auditing. And what CAG audit did is, it said that the overall deal struck by the government was 2.86% cheaper than the price that agreed by the UPA. So how ridiculous is this? They have increased the price, they have decreased the number, and the CAG is saying that it is 2.86, and it did not disclose any pricing details. So there is no transparency here. So this is a controversy here. And next is, so you need to link this topic to this issue, like 33 new fighter jet aircrafts Ministry of Defense has agreed to purchase from Russia worth 38,900 crore. And you also need to know who is the President and Prime Minister of Russia, and also the constitutional reforms. Because if you look at question 1.2 in the first sample paper, like they gave a passage about Amazon forest fires, and they asked who is the Prime Minister of Brazil. So that is the thing. So just know about that. So next is National Education Policy or New Educational Policy. So this education policy is released by Ministry of Human Resource Development on the same day when Rafale fighter jets came to India. So this policy was prepared based on the draft prepared by Kasturi Rangan. Kasturi Rangan is a former ISRO chief. And if you look at education, it is an entry to list 3 of 7th schedule. So in 7th schedule, there are 3 lists. One is state list, central list, and concurrent list. So union list is the first list, second is the state list, and third is concurrent list. So subjects in concurrent list means that both states and union share concurrent jurisdiction. That means both have equal power, and in case of contradictory, in cases of any, say for example, when a state law on a subject enumerated in concurrent list becomes contradictory to the union law, then the union law will prevail. So union law is given upper hand. So this is about education. It is in concurrent list. So education policy still that first policy was in 1968, then in 1986. So this was slightly amended in 1992, but no major reforms. And after 34 years, this was a new education policy was framed in 2020. So let's look at this. So what are the salient features of national education policy? So the first thing is conversion of Ministry of Human Resource Development to Education Ministry. Another thing is they substituted this 10+2 system to 5+3+4. So let us see what is this 5+3+4 system. I think I have it in the next slide. Okay. So this. So the earlier thing is this one, and now we got this. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 stages. Like in the first stage, it is of foundation stage. here multi-level play or activity based learning. That means learning will be based on visualizing the things, identifying the things. So all this type of learning. So this is like 3 years uh, preschool or Anganwadi or Bal Vikas school. So this will be from ages 3 to 6, and 2 years. So this is like grade 1 and grade 2, or class 1 and class 2. Then from classes 3 to 5, this is called as preparatory stage. Here they are going to include play, discovery, activity based and interactive classroom learning. So in foundation stage there will be no classroom learning, so it is all about play or activity based learning, and in the preparatory stage will be introduced to classroom learning, and the next 3 year stages from classes 6 to 8. So this is experiential learning in the sciences, mathematics, social sciences and humanities. And next we have this secondary stage, like we'll have multidisciplinary study. So we'll discuss this in the slide I gave there. And greater critical thinking, flexibility and student choice of subjects. So this flexibility thing I added it in the slide, I'll discuss that. Okay, so next thing is this multiple entry and exit facilities and storage of credits. So why this, what is this multiple entry and exit, and what is the motivation for the government to introduce this thing? So what is this multiple entry and exit? Like say for example, you have generally in India graduation is for 3 years, and if you leave after 1 year you will be given a certificate, and if you leave the course after 2 years you will be given a diploma, and if you are done with 3 years you will be given a graduation certificate, and if you are doing the graduation for 4 years you will be given a research certificate, so that you will be able to do masters in 1 year and you will be eligible for research. Here there is multiple entry and exit option. Like if you are living in the first year, you can take some gap and you can enter in the second year, so then your first year credits will be stored. So like you need not study it again, you can continue the course later. So this is multiple entry and exit option and credit storage of credits. And next is another important things are Higher Education Commission of India. So National Education Policy or the New Education Policy 2020 provides for an establishment of Higher Education Commission of India. So this is by replacing UGC, that is University Grants Commission, and AICTE, which is the All India Council for Technical Education. So under this Higher Education Council of India, the 4 verticals will be functioning, like 1 for regulation, 2 for accreditation, 3 for funding and 4 for setting standards. And the main motive is this one: phasing out all institutions having single streams by 2020. Like when we saw in the 4th stage, we looked at something called as multidisciplinary approach. So what do I mean by multidisciplinary approach and phasing out all institutions having single streams? Like say for example, there are Indian Institutes of Technology or IITs. So their education is delivered to them only on so there are only engineering courses there. So if you look at IIMs, management courses, and national law universities, legal courses. So by 2040 they are going to phase out all these things, and what they are going to do, they are going to have multidisciplinary approach. Like even in IITs you will be able to study management, you will be able to study law, and you will be also able to study humanities also. And next thing is they are going to establish this National Education Technology Forum for transfer of technology. And another important and slight controversial thing here is this paving way for foreign universities. The draft said that, as I remember, they said they'll give permission to around some 100 reputed foreign universities for establishment in India, but there is a criticism here that they might charge higher fee, and this might make education inaccessible to the citizens of India, and this actually defeats the purpose of this policy. Another thing is the 6% of GDP. So as of now, I think there is some 4.2% of GDP is spent on education. So 6% of GDP was recommended by Kothari Committee in 1968, and now they are going to implement it. And the other motive is to capping the fee, which means that we have discussed in the earlier slide, like uh, National Council for Education. So the same institution will be overseeing both government and private institutions, and they are trying to provide this stress-free learning and inclusion, that is to include women and disabled into education. So based on the CLAT way, based on the questions asked in the sample papers, we need to know some certain facts, like who is the minister for HRD or education? It is Ramesh Nishank Pokhriyal. And chairman of UGC, it is DP Singh. And who regulates legal education in India? Bar Council of India. And right to education was made is a fundamental right under Article 21A. So right to education amendment act was brought by the parliament. So this is very important thing. Like, so what is the motivation of the government is it scrapped no detention policy for classes 5 to 8. That means if students fail in classes 5 to 8, they will be detained. That means they will not be promoted and they will be detained. So this choice was given by right to education amendment act, and this is criticized. And right to education was made a fundamental right by which amendment? Answer in the comments below. And what is the literacy rate in India? If you know the answer, do it in the comments. This next topic is disqualification and 10th schedule. So if you look, most of the newspapers have covered this Rajasthan political crisis. So what is this Rajasthan political crisis? There is a split in the Congress government. So it has split into Sachin Pilot and Ashok Gehlot. So Ashok Gehlot is the chief minister of Rajasthan, and the deputy chief minister Sachin Pilot, he actually defected, or so he is not officially declared to be defected, but he is a rebel MLA. So now another thing which has come into limelight is the partisan role of governor. That is when Ashok Gehlot's group went and asked the governor to call for a floor test. Governor is reluctant in calling for a floor test. Another thing is this intervention of judiciary. So role of speaker. In role of speaker, so this is going against the principles laid down in Kyoto Holohan versus Jachillu in 1992. So actually before a speaker taking a call on defection, Supreme Court intervened here. So this is called as judicial indiscipline in one of the newspapers. As a I think it is the Hindu. In Hindu they wrote it as judicial indiscipline. So let us see what is the issue all about, and about disqualification. So disqualification on grounds of disqualification grounds in the constitution. So article 102 and 191. So you know the trick to remember article. When an article is there in the union, if you want to know the same state article, you have to add 89 to it. 89. Like say for example, article 74 says that there shall be a council of ministers headed by prime minister to aid and advise the president. So for the same, if you add 89, you will get 163, which speaks about council of ministers headed by chief minister to aid and advise the governor. Same here. Another thing what you can do is, like here it is 102, remove 1, so it will become 1 here. And as you removed 1 here, you have to, so here what is the number? Here it is 10. So remove 1 from here. If you remove 1 from here, it will become 9. So 191. So you will get this number 191. So just by removing this number and adding it here. I think it did not work out here. Okay, let's see. For 74, 75, 76 and other union and state, it will work out. So what are the disqualification grounds mentioned in the Indian Constitution under articles 102 and 191? That is one is office of profit. Another thing is if he is of unsound mind and is declared by the court, and if he is an undischarged insolvent, that means he has gone bankrupt. And if he has ceased to be a citizen of India, and he is disqualified by any other law in parliament. This any other law in parliament is nothing but the Representation of Peoples Act 1951. There are two RP Acts, one is in 1950 and other is in 1951. So disqualification under 10th schedule. So 10th schedule is officially not called as anti-defection law, but there are certain grounds for defection under 10th schedule. So under 10th schedule, disqualification is done on grounds of defection. What do I mean by defection? Defection is just jumping, or not jumping, what I can say, voluntarily giving up the membership of the party, or abstaining or voting against the directives of the party in a legislature. So this is the defection which is mentioned in the 10th schedule. And this anti-defection law, this was not there in the original constitution. This was added by the 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1985. Why? So the trend of defection actually started in 1967, when in Haryana there was there was an MLA called Gayalal. He changed his party 3 times in one day. Like in the morning, he jumped from Indian National Congress to Janata Dal. Then after 9 hours, again he jumped from Janata Dal to Indian National Congress. So this type of thing has raised some ethical concerns, like it is going against the mandate of people. It doesn't mean that a person who is elected only because of that person. So he might be elected by seeing the party symbol. So because of this, so it has become an ethical concern, and Rajiv Gandhi government introduced this 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act in 1985, which added 10th schedule. In the original constitution, there are only 8 schedules. So, so this has given a popular phrase in Indian politics, that is Ayaram and Gayaram, based on this Gayalal's party change. And what are the grounds of defection under anti-defection law? So if a member of a house in the sense anything, so it might be Lok Sabha, it might be Rajya Sabha, it might be State Legislative Assembly, it might be State Legislative Council, voluntarily gives up the membership of his or her political party. That means he gave up the political party on which he has won, on which he or she has won, and or if he or she votes or does not vote in the legislature contrary to the directions of his political party. So what does this mean? Say for example, government has called for Citizenship Amendment Act. So when Citizenship Amendment Bill was placed in the parliament, the opposition party issued a whip to its members, like don't vote in this bill, don't vote for this bill. But what these people, what the party member did, if party member votes for or against Citizenship Act, so it means that he defected from the party, he is not adhering to the objectives of the party. However, if the member has taken prior permission or is condoned by the party within 15 days from such voting or abstention, the member shall not be disqualified. So this is the thing. So if he is taking prior permission, or if the party is condoning him within 15 days, so he will not be disqualified. Another thing is, if an independent candidate joins a political party after the election, he will be disqualified. And if a nominated member joins a party after 6 months, after he becomes a member of the legislature, he will be disqualified. Here, there is a bias between independent and nominated member. So, rule making power. So, the presiding officer of the house is empowered to make all the rules to give effect to the 10th schedule. So, all such rules must be placed before the house of 30 days. That means after the act came into force. So Other thing is that further he may direct that any willful contravention by any of member of such house may be dealt with the same manner as breach of privilege. So we have something called as parliamentary privileges or legislative privileges. So we have individual privileges which are available to MPs or MLAs, and there is collective privileges which are held collectively by the house. So any willful contravention, that means violating the rules that are prescribed by the presiding officer, may be dealt with the same punishment or same punishment which is available for breach of privilege. If someone is breaching the privileges of the house, it can be dealt with the similar manner. Another thing is, according to the rules made, so presiding officer can take up a defection case only when he receives a complaint from a member of the house. So that means if a complaint is not received, speaker cannot take action. So which means that speaker cannot suo motu take the defection. Suo motu cannot disqualify a person, disqualify a legislature based on defection. So before the final decision is taken, he must give the member a chance to submit his explanation. So very simple. And he may also refer the matter to the committee of privileges. So there are some committees, parliamentary committees, committee on privileges, and there are ethics committees, and so on and so forth. So the presiding officer may refer the matter to them. Hence, defection has no immediate and automatic effect. Why it has no automatic effect? Because speaker cannot suo motu take the case. So it does not have automatic and immediate effect. So next important case is Quixote Holohan versus Jachillu in 1992, and there is a slight mistake in the book Lakshmikant. In one of the chapters they mention it as 1993, but it is 1992. So here disqualification arising out of defection is to be decided by the presiding officer of the house. So which effectively meant that the court is not willing to involve into the domain of legislature, and this is based on 1880 Charles Bardolph issue. Like there is a MP in Britain, in the British House of Commons. His name is Charles Bardolph, and what is this case is, like, he is an atheist. So as he is an atheist, and what the Britain according to Britain's laws or even Indian laws, a member cannot enjoy the privileges, or a member cannot sit in the house without taking oath. Like what is there in Britain is, oath can be taken only in the name of God. So what this Charles Bardolph did, he said he will not take oath. So what the presiding officer said, I will not allow you into the house. So this went to the Britain courts, and courts refused to interfere because it is in the domain of legislature. So this was actually quoted, this was actually referred by the Supreme Court in the Quixote Holohan versus Jachillu. So originally, I mean, in the 10th schedule or the 52nd constitutional amendment, the act provided that decision of the presiding officer is final and cannot be questioned in any court. So this is in the original Baer Act, but in Quixote Holohan, Supreme Court held that presiding officer, while deciding a question under 10th schedule, functions like a tribunal, so that like any other tribunal, his decision is subject to judicial review on grounds of malafides, perversity, etc. So malafides and perversity in the sense, like there is bad intention, or what I can say, mens rea, or malafide or malfeasance. So based on these grounds, Supreme Court can Supreme Court or higher judiciary, that is High Courts or Supreme Court, can review the decision. But to review the decision should be taken. Like after Speaker takes a decision, then only High Court or Supreme Court can take that issue. But what happened in Rajasthan, before Speaker actually taking a call on the issue, court interfered. So this is against the theory of separation of powers. Of course, however, India does not have this clear watertight compartmental separation of powers, but it is a violation of the separation of powers. So there are some exceptions, that is legislatures may change their party. So because when the when a party to merge with or into another party, provided that at least two-thirds of the its legislatures are in favor of the merger. So what is this? Say for example, there are some 30 members and two-thirds, that is 20 members, agrees to jump into another party. So this will not lead to defection. That means this wholesalely they can defect into other party, and it will not amount to defection. And in such scenario, neither the members who decide to merge nor the ones who stay in the original party will face a defection. So what is this? Here there is a bias again between wholesale defections and retail defection. Retail defections are not allowed, whereas wholesale defections are allowed. So another thing is about this presiding officer. This is also again based on a precedent from the Britain, that is to uh, to ensure impartiality in the presiding officer chair. So when a person is elected as a presiding officer of the house, so he can voluntarily give up the membership, and after getting down from the chair, he can again reacquire the party's membership. So disqualification, so there are some issues with it, that is intra-party democracy. Intra-party democracy, dissent, and Article 19. Like say for example, so this is actually going against the internal democracy in the party. Like intra-party, in the sense inside the party, people are not allowed to express their own views. So this is curbing their dissent, which is effectively a fundamental right under Article 19. So along with this, you also go through the political crisis in Karnataka, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Manipur, and Arunachal Pradesh, which were seen in the news from in the last 1 year or so. So next important topic is permanent commission to women into Indian Army. So this permanent commission question, entire questions on permanent commission, they were asked in sample paper 3, questions 9.1 to 9.5. So on 23rd July, Ministry of Defense allowed permanent commission to women into Indian Army. So this is based on a decision or a verdict delivered by the Supreme Court on February 17, 2020. So broadly classifying, there are three types of gender discrimination in armed forces. One is entry into combat forces, two is permanent commission, and three is command roles. So let's address every issue here. Yeah. So currently the second problem is resolved, that is permanent commission. So what is permanent commission? There is something called a short service commission also. What is the difference between short service commission and permanent commission? Short service commission, a member can serve for 10 years and it is extendable for 4 more years. That means so maximum for 14 years, and they will not be eligible for pensions. Here they will be eligible for pension. So after completing short service commission, if you want to get pension, or if you want to serve for more time, you have to apply for permanent commission. But before March 2019, only men in short service commission were allowed to apply for permanent commission. However, in March 2019, government made women also eligible to for permanent commission, but only with prospective effect. What do I mean by prospective effect? That means from now. That means, say for example, government made a decision in March. So from March 2019 onwards, whoever are joining, so they will be eligible. And people before who joined the short service commission, that means before March 2019, will not be eligible. But now it is made retrospective. So next, another gender discrimination thing is about this combat and non-combat forces. So what is combat force? Combat force is something in which we are engaged in fighting enemy. It might be either in person or through weapons. So currently only men are eligible for combat forces. So women are basically banned by the government as well as the army by citing some psychological reasons like pregnancy, childbirth, and menstruation. So however, they are allowed into non-combat roles like army medical, army legal, army educational corps, signal, logistics and engineering. Now they will be granted permanent commission in 10 non-combat roles in which they are engaged, but not in combat roles. Another issue is command roles. So what are women are actually barred from command roles. So by citing the reason that men are not prepared to take commands from women. So this is actually a stereotypic statement, and it is discriminatory, and it is also showing the patriarchal mindset. So these were the comments of the Supreme Court in various judgments which asked the government to introduce women into combat roles. So you also need to link this topic. So as CLAD does. As CLAD did in its sample paper, you have to know who is the first female Indian naval pilot. It is Sub Lieutenant Shivangi. And first female Defence Minister of India is Indira Gandhi. It is not Nirmala Sitharaman. Nirmala Sitharaman is India's first full-time defence minister. So another important thing here is Saudi Arabia recently allowed women to join armed forces. So according to IISS, International Institution for Strategic Studies, women comprise 10% of Russian armed forces. Right? So initially there are some things like under Army Act 1950, women are ineligible for employment in regular army except in corps or departments or branches with the central government. But this was lifted in 1992 by making women for eligible for appointment as officers in 5 branches. So next topic is contempt of court. So this is also seen in the news because of Prashant Bhushan's tweets on Chief Justice and the previous Chief Justices. So what is this contempt? So Halsbury, eminent political scientist and constitutional expert, defines contempt as consisting of words spoken or written which obstruct or tend to obstruct the administration of justice, which is actually self-explanatory. So why there is the power to punish for its contempt? Because if people disobey the orders of judiciary will lose its reputation, and the judicial administration will be jeopardized. And under Article 129 and 215, Supreme Court and High Courts respectively have the power to punish for their contempt. So, Lord Hayward in 1923, an American judge, he said, not only must justice be done, it must also be seen to be done. So justice actually must be seen to be done, so that it will deter the criminals from doing crimes, and it will increase the faith in the judicial system. And when this contempt type of things are done, they are actually jeopardizing the judicial system. Next is in the Indian Constitution, contempt is actually not defined, but it is defined in Contempts of Court Act 1971. Two types of contempts are there here. They are civil and criminal. What is civil contempt? Civil contempt, read this statement. I'll explain in very simple words. Like, say for example, you were arrested for maliciously acquiring an apartment or some other case, and you were granted bail by the Supreme Court or High Court on ground that you will not leave the city. Say for example, you are in Hyderabad and you will agree to the court that you will not leave Hyderabad. But what you will do, you will leave Hyderabad and you will go to Bombay. So what is this? This is called as civil contempt. But generally, civil contempts are not taken so seriously by the courts. Courts will say give warnings, or they will say that will impose hefty penalties and so on. But they are not taken so seriously by the courts. What is actually taken so seriously is this criminal contempt. This criminal contempt is of three types. First thing is scandalizes or tends to scandalize, or lowers or tends to lower the authority of any court. Say for example, a judge has given a pronouncement in one of the cases, and what I will do, I will write something by saying that this judge has taken some bribe, or he has some intentions like he's favoring his caste or religion or so and so thing. So what I'm doing here, I am scandalizing or I am lowering the authority of the court. And other thing is interfering into judicial proceedings. So this will disturb the justice judicial administration, and interferes or tend to interferes or obstructs or tends to obstruct the administration of justice in any other manner. So what is the punishment? The punishment is 6 months jail or fine up to 2000 or both, and these criminal contempts are taken very seriously by the courts. Why? Because court is not a physical building. Court is just a bench or a group of judges. So since these are actually lowering their status, so these will be taken very seriously. So contempt of courts and freedom of expression, if you look under article 19 clause 1, there are certain 6 freedoms granted to every citizen, and under clause 2, that is article 19 clause 2, there are exemptions given subject to law, order, public health, morality, and contempt of court. So that means in simple words, committing contempt of court is not a part of your freedom of speech and expression. So now let us look at the context why this contempt of court is in the news. So the Supreme Court has actually initiated a suo motu contempt proceedings against lawyer Prashant Bhushan and Twitter India on 21st July. What do I mean by suo motu? Which means I have taken the cognizance of the case without anyone filing a petition. Self cognizance. So what are the tweets of Bhushan? You all must have seen it. First thing is one thing is that he was riding a bike without wearing a helmet or mask while keeping the Supreme Court in lockdown mode and denying citizens their fundamental rights to access justice. And other is the role of last 4 CJIs. So he has commented on these things. So later what happened is the CJI who was spotted with a Harley Davidson bike was not riding the bike as some thought after the photograph went viral. So the CJI, he has participated in a tree function. So all these things is not required. Yeah. So you also need to look that the Contempt of Court Act 1971 was amended in 2006 to add a layer of defense, that is, if something is done in good faith as a valid defense. So what is amendment did? It recognized truth and good faith as a valid defense against the contempt of court. Earlier this was not there. Another thing is more than 130 eminent persons, including Justice Madan Lokur, Justice A.P. Shah. So all these people, they wrote to the Supreme Court challenging or asking to withdraw contempt charges against Bhushan. Another thing is recently a PIL was filed in the Supreme Court challenging the validity of Contempt of Court Act. Next important thing is Consumer Protection Act 2019. So this Consumer Protection Act, it has actually replaced 1986 Consumer Protection Act. So let us look at this. So in 1986 Act, there is no separate regulator. Now they had established Central Consumer Protection Authority and Consumer Court. Complaint could be filed at Consumer Court where the seller's office is located, but here where the complainant's office is located. Like say for example, you have purchased something from Amazon and you got some defected good. So earlier you need to file the case where Amazon's office is located, but now where your office is located or where you are residing, at this place you can file the case. So next thing is no provision consumer could approach a civil court but not a consumer court. Here consumer can seek compensation or harm caused by a product or service, and district court up to 20 lakh, and state they have increased this limit till 1 crore, 1 crore to 10 crore, and national above 10 crore. And for e-commerce, earlier there were no provisions for e-commerce like this Amazon type of thing, and now all rules of direct selling extended to e-commerce. Here no legal provision, and here court can refer settlement through mediation. So next, let us look at the salient features of Consumer Protection Act. So this Consumer Protection Act, it has redefined the consumer's right. Like it has made the consumer the right to be protected against marketing of goods and services which are hazardous to life and property, and it has also made the right to be informed of quality, quantity, potency, purity, standard, and price of goods and services. All these should be known to the consumer, and it is a matter of right for the consumer to know all these things, and the seller or manufacturer or distributor has the obligation to inform the same to the consumer. And next most important, I made with star mark, that is, be assured of access to a variety of goods and services at competitive prices. What do I mean by this? Access to variety of goods and services at competitive prices. It means it is reducing monopoly, it is increasing competition, and to seek redressal against unfair and restrictive trade practices. So other thing is the establishment of Central Consumer Protection Authority to deal with all these things, and punishments for misleading advertisements. And they has also established this Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission as an appellate body for Central Consumer Protection Authority. And there is also something called as product liability. So what is this product liability? So liability of a product manufacturer, service provider, or seller to compensate a consumer for any harm or injury caused by a defective good or deficient service. Like if any harm is caused by a defective good or a deficient service, it has to be compensated by the seller or manufacturer. Like say for example, you have purchased this pen and it found to be defective, so you can take the bill and go to the seller from whom you have purchased, and he will compensate you. Or service in the sense, say for example, you went to a salon, and what he did, he took the blade and hit you here, and it started bleeding, and what you can do, you can demand compensation from him. So you also need to know, like, who is the Union Minister for Consumer Affairs? It is Ram Vilas Paswan. What is the full name of the ministry? It is Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Distribution. It is a full name of Consumer Affairs Ministry. And World Consumer Rights Day is on 15th March. And the theme for 2020 is the Sustainable Consumer. And in India, Consumer Rights Day is celebrated on December 24th. And theme 2019 was Alternate Consumer Grievance or Dispute Redressal. Next, issues about non-personal data. What is this non-personal data? So there is something called as personal data and non-personal data, and this is not the exact classification of data, because data is classified into primary data, secondary data, personal data, non-personal data, and all these things. But now our point of interest is only personal data and non-personal data. So what is this non-personal data? Non-personal data is any data that does not reveal the personal identity of an individual. So very simple. And personal data is a data which is piece of or a set of information which reveals the identity of individual. So in this technological era, data has become most powerful, and misusing of data has become a privacy concern. If you remember, in 2018, because of misusing of data, or selling of data, or breaching of data by Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, was called to the Senate Senate, which is a part of American Congress, and Mark Zuckerberg, he apologized and he said that he will be held responsible for Facebook's mistake. So this is the thing about data. So it is largely a privacy concern, and right to privacy is a fundamental right under Article 21. And why this is in the news? Because in the present context, a 9-member committee was appointed by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, headed by Chris Gopalakrishnan. Chris Gopalakrishnan is the co-founder of Infosys. Why they have appointed this committee? They appointed this committee to seek suggestions for non-personal data regulation. So that is a simple thing. And this committee released this draft report on July 21, and it gave time for people to give their suggestions till August 13. And there is another important thing is there is no explicit mention of the word non-personal data in government documents. But however, in Economic Survey 2018-19, they spoke about data which is stored in the ministries. So that we can refer as non-personal data, but there is no explicit mention about that. What is the draft of Chris Gopalakrishnan? He has classified this data into 3 main categories. One is public non-personal data, community non-personal data, and private non-personal data. So we'll discuss each of these. But before that, so what this Chris Gopalakrishnan committee said that non-personal data generated in India be allowed to be harnessed by various domestic companies and entities. So first point what he is saying is the non-personal data which is generated in India, it should be allowed for usage by various companies, and a separate national legislation and separate authority to oversee non-personal data. Another thing is mandatory sharing of non-personal data. So this is again a bone of contention, as it may be useful for Indian entrepreneurs to develop new and innovative services or products to benefit citizens. Say for example, there is an entrepreneur who has started a startup relating to selling or manufacture or distributing meat. So what non-personal data is required for such entrepreneur is in which geographical location meat is consumed more. If that data is known to the entrepreneur, so it would help him or her. So it says that mandatory sharing of non-personal data. So mandatory sharing is a bone of contention, because once data is actually it is securing their data is their fundamental right, and we cannot make it mandatory, and if making it mandatory will make it arbitrary. So that is the thing, and we'll look at these various categories of data. So what is this public non-personal data? So it involves all the data collected by government and its agencies during execution of publicly funded works like census, data collected by municipal corporation. So from this census or data collected by municipal corporation, if you remove the personally identifiable things and the data which you will have, and that is called public non-personal data. And next is community non-personal data. It involves data identifiers about a set of people who have either same geographical location, religion, job, or other common social interests, like the data collected by telecom agencies or ride-hailing apps like Ola, Uber, Rapido, and electricity distribution companies. And next is private non-personal data. That is, it can be defined as those which are produced by individuals, which cannot be derived from application of software or knowledge. So like it is like data generated by companies like Google and Amazon, etc. What are the important and what is the importance and what are the impediments or challenges of non-personal data? So it will help to map consumer biases and ensure targeted delivery of services. I gave you the meat example earlier, and it will unlock the doors of economic value and innovation. Yes. And what are the impediments? That is, the data sets will be these will heavily favor big tech companies, because Only they have the infrastructure. What I mean by infrastructure, they have enough infrastructure to harness these non-personal data. What I mean by infrastructure is hardware, software, and capital, that is money. So big companies will definitely have this, and they will be able to harness data, and uh, this is not going to benefit small companies. And India is a signatory to TRIPS. What is TRIPS? TRIPS is trade related aspects to intellectual aspects of intellectual property rights. And here India has also extended copyright protection to computer databases. Now there is a challenge between non-personal data that cannot be shared and in non-copyright, non-personal data that can be used as public resource. So there is no clarity over this in the committee's report. So also don't forget to look about this data protection bill, personal data protection bill, which was the draft which was given by Justice Sri Krishna committee, and currently it is in a joint parliamentary committee. And one of the important thing that I would like to highlight here is Supreme Court declared that access to internet is protected under Article 19 of the Constitution. That is, Article 29 was made a fundamental right, and this is not an accurate statement, and this is a false statement. So this is generalization of judgment. So if you look at para 28 of the judgment, this judgment was written by Justice Ramana, N.V. Ramana, and what the judgment reads: none of the councils have argued for declaring right to access to internet as a fundamental right. Therefore, we are not expressing any views on it. We are confining ourselves to declaring that the right to freedom of speech and the right to carry on trade or profession using the medium of internet is constitutionally protected. What is this? The simply putting it in simple terms, right to freedom of speech and the right to carry on trade or profession using internet is protected, but right to internet is not declared as a fundamental right. And Kerala, it is the first state to declare access to internet as a basic human right way back in 2017. So next topic is state of food security and nutrition in the world report. So what is this? So the state of food security and nutrition in the world report, it is an annual flagship report jointly prepared by Food and Agriculture Organization, which is based out of Rome, Italy, and International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is also based in Rome, Italy. United Nations Children Fund, which is based in Washington. And World Food Program, which is based in Rome, and World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. So what is this food security? Food security, so according to United Nations Committee on World Food Security, it means that all people it means that all people at all times here there is a temporal thing, that is all times in the sense at every time, they should have physical, social and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their food preference and dietary needs. So what does this mean? Physical and social access to food means that there should be physical storage of food, and economic access implies that people should have money at all times to access this sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their food preferences and dietary needs. So what is nutrition? Nutrition is a process of intake of nutrients like carbohydrates, fats, proteins, minerals, vitamins and water by an organism, as well as utilization of these nutrients by the organism. So this is definition of food security and nutrition. So what is the objective of the State of Food Security and Nutrition Index 2020? So the main objective is to inform on the process to progress towards ending hunger, achieving food security, and improving nutrition, and to provide in-depth analysis on key challenges for achieving this goal in the context of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. If you look at Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 2 says zero hunger. So what SOFI is suggesting, SOFI 2020 is suggesting that to achieve this Goal 2 by 2020 is actually a difficult task. So the main objective of this report is to inform about the progress and what progress has come. Let us look at the report's observation. So I have taken out only India specific observations. So there are many facts in that report. I skipped all of them. I took only India specific observations. So what are they? Hundreds of millions of people in India above the international poverty line of $1.90 purchasing power parity per person per day cannot afford a healthy nutritious diet. So what is this poverty line? Poverty line is actually a threshold limit, like there a certain limit is imposed, like here the international poverty line is $1.90. So people who are below this are called below poverty line, and on this line they are called as poor. So what is international poverty line? It is $1.9. So in India, people who are above earning above $1.9 per day cannot afford a healthy or nutritious diet. So this is observation made by SOFI, and this analysis confirms the fact that the problem of poor nutrition is in India is largely because people cannot afford or they don't have the economic means to get food, and it is not at all because of a lack of information or nutrition awareness. So those we officially count as poor in India with a cutoff that is lower than the international norm of 1.9 per day. See, according to international norm, a fellow who is earning below 1.9 is considered as below poverty, or he is considered as poor fellow. But in India, it is 27 rupees per day in rural areas and 33 rupees in urban areas per day. So $1.9 is somewhere around more than 130 rupees, and in India the line is kept at like some 27 and 33. So this was made by a Tendulkar committee. Like the concept of poverty line in India was introduced by Alag committee, and after that some 3 committees were formed to estimate poverty in India. The first is Lagdawala committee, second is Tendulkar, and third is Rangarajan. So Tendulkar committee gave this estimate that 27 rupees per day in rural areas and 33 in urban areas. So that is really very, very low, and there is a need to upgrade it. And overall, what the report is saying, that 18% of South Asians, that is 586 million people, cannot afford the nutrient adequate diet, and 58% of South Asians, that is 1,337 million people, cannot afford healthy diet. So these are observations made by SOFI, and you need to link this topic to Food Security Act 2013 and PDS system. So this act was passed in 2013, and you also need to know about Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, under which 5 kg of rice or wheat and also 1 kg of pulses will be given to the poor till November. And you also need to know about India's rank in Global Hunger Index, that is 102 out of 117. So such kind of question was asked in that Arnab Goswami question. And who is the Union Minister for Food Processing? It is Harsimrat Kaur Badal. So next is China's claim over Bhutan. So let's instead of going directly into the issue, so let us go to the background. Like China and Bhutan both are India's neighbors, and Bhutan is a buffer state. What do I mean by buffer state? Buffer state means a state which is between 2 larger states. Like here, state means state according to me is now is country. Like between India and China, there is a small state that is called Bhutan, that is a buffer state. Even Nepal is considered as a buffer state. So now the current dispute is at Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary, which is receiving funds from an international organization. So Sakteng is very strategic because uh, it shares, it has an international border with Arunachal Pradesh, and China is actually using its cartographic aggression. So what do I mean by cartographic aggression? That is by redrawing the maps and showing on the map that entire territory is mine. So what is actually cartography? Cartography is a science and art of map making. So why China has many territorial ambitions? Why China has many territorial ambitions? Like China is coming into Galwan Valley, and China wants Bhutan, China wants Nepal, China wants Tibet, it wants Hong Kong. So what is why it has this many territorial ambitions? So they use this Mao's hand palm finger strategy. So this is their foreign policy. If you look at this hand, uh, this hand, this entire hand is called China, or what I can call United China or Akhand China, and this hand part, this is China, mainland China, and this palm is Tibet, and these five fingers are five Himalayan states. They are Bhutan, Nepal, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim. So these five Himalayan states, China and Tibet. So this is China's Akhand China or United China policy. And what is this Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary dispute? So recently, this Bhutan's foreign ministry, it gave a notice, or it gave a dematch to Chinese embassy in New Delhi for the claims made by China over Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary. So actually this Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary is receiving funds from Global Environmental Facility. This Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary is located in eastern Bhutan. So actually this entire issue I will explain it with the help of map. What is the time? So initially China is having disputes with Nepal in this western sector and in the middle sector. So like they have disputes at so they have disputes at Jekarland, Passamlang, and also at Chumbi Valley. So in the western sector and in the middle sector. But now China is claiming over this eastern sector. So earlier there was no dispute here. See, if you look here, the same in the slide, Bhutan and China had no formal diplomatic relations but have held 24 rounds of boundary talks between 1984 and 2016. And talks concentrated on north and West Bhutan regions. So actually it is northwest and in the middle sector. So eastern Bhutan not part of talks so far. So that means there is no bone of contention in the eastern sector. So what is this? The recent claim was made at 50th meeting of Global Environmental Facility Council, where China tried to oppose funding to a project for the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary situated in Bhutan, saying that it was a disputed territory. And earlier, China did not obstruct fundings to Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary. While China and Bhutan don't have formal diplomatic relations, these two sides have been in talks, but those disputes are not resolved till date. So let us know something about this global uh, environmental fund, global environmental facility. So this was established at 1992. This was established on 1992 at Rio Earth Summit to help tackle environmental problems on that. So what this does, that is, it gives uh, funding to developing countries and countries which are in economic transition. So the trustee of this global environmental facility is World Bank. So, and you also need to know that Bhutan's capital is Thimphu and the prime minister is Lotay Shering. And this gross national happiness index, Bhutan calculates its national income, its GDP, in the form of gross national happiness index. So they take happiness as their GDP. So, and you need to know about this Doklam standoff, like Doklam. So it is disputed between India and sorry, not India, China and Bhutan, and India supported Bhutan, and on account of this, India China first informal summit was held in Wuhan. So Wuhan is a city in China which resembles the economic resilience of China. And second informal summit that was held in Mamallapuram in Tamil Nadu. So, and you need to know about all other events related to India China and India Bhutan and China. Maratha Kota in Maharashtra. So who are these Marathas? So they constitute some one third uh, of Maharashtra, and they evolved from a farming caste of Kunbis. So these Kunbis, they went into military services in the medieval times. So what is the current issue? I'll put it very simple. Uh, there are certain medical students who challenge this Socially and Educationally Backward Classes Act 2018. So this act is providing reservation to Marathas to MBBS courses. So what they did, they filed a petition in the Bombay High Court. What Bombay High Court did, Bombay High Court rejected that, and they filed a petition in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court refused to stay the judgment. So what happened now? They have filed a special leave petition. So we have some concepts to learn here. Two things. One is special leave petition, and second is this 50% cap. So this is the reason why Maharashtra reservations were challenged, because of this 50% cap. So first, what is this special leave petition? So what is uh, so before understanding what is special leave petition, we'll just try to know the general process of appeal. The general process of appeal goes on like this: first from the lower courts, then to the high courts, then to the Supreme Court. So if a if an appeal to be filed from High Court to Supreme Court, it has to be done either under Article 132, 133 or 134. 132, appeal from High Court to Supreme Court in any matter, 133 in civil cases, and 134 in criminal cases. But when a High Court does not certify a case for appeal, then the petitioner can file a special leave petition in front of the Supreme Court. But an appeal by special leave is not a matter of right. And the special leave petition, I forgot to mention, is under Article 136 of the Indian Constitution. And it is a discretion of the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court will grant you the leave from all these process of appeal. Sometimes you can even appeal from lower court to Supreme Court directly. So this is called special leave petition. And next point is this 50% cap. What is this 50% cap? With respect to reservations, there is a landmark judgment called Indira Sahane versus Union of India in 1992, popularly known as Mandal case. So in Indira Sahane versus Union of India, the Supreme Court reiterated that reservation should not exceed 50% except in special or exceptional circumstances. But this special or exceptional circumstances is again is a subjective concept. So many states have exceeded this limit already. Like Tamil Nadu, it has 69% reservations and they have placed it in the ninth schedule. Before 24th April 1973, that is before the pronouncement of the judge Keshwananda Bharati verdict, all the subjects which are kept in the ninth schedule are immune from judicial review. But after Keshwananda Bharati case, even they are not immune from judicial review. In this IR Coelho case, what the Supreme Court said that even those subjects which are in the ninth schedule are can be reviewed by the judiciary. So that is a judgment, and Telangana is having some 62% reservation, and Haryana around 67, and Maharashtra, like if they are increasing this reservation to 12, it will be 64, and if they are increasing to 13%, it will be 65. So that is the thing, and you have to know about this elite issues. Like 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act, which granted constitutional status to NCBC. NCBC is National Commission for Backward Classes. Earlier, it was a statutory body under the Ministry of Social Justice. And recent reservation issue like Andhra Pradesh 100% reservation in tribal schools later was scrapped by the courts. And next, reservation in promotion is not a fundamental right. Even this was reiterated by the Supreme Court.